So we are going to be covering decisions and loops. And so we're basically getting into the building blocks of programming. And the three primary building blocks are sequence, which is built in to coding because it runs from the top to the bottom. Selection, which is decision making. So based on the result of the decision, you can branch into different directions. And repetition, where you are repeating the same chunk of code multiple times. So within a program, you automatically have sequence, and then you can have selection, which is your decision making, and repetition, which is your loops. And in order to do selection and repetition, you have to utilize conditional testing. Conditional testing uses comparison and logical operators. So we're going to quickly review what those operators are. So if you want to compare two variables, you're either going to use 2 equal signs or 3 equal signs. 1 equal sign is an assignment statement. So an assignment statement, you're putting a value into a variable. It does not do any kind of equality check. 2 equal signs, it checks the value being stored, but not the data type. So in this first example, if you remember, JavaScript is loosely typed, so we do not tell it a data type. So it actually looks at the value we are storing and it makes an assumption about what the data type is. So for year 1, it's going to assume a number. And for year 2, because that is in double quotes, it's going to assume a string. So if we're going to check for equality, and we don't care what the data type is, we just want to check the actual value that's being stored. If we use 2 equal signs, year 1 and year 2 are going to be the same. Okay, and so here's our little selection structure where it's checking for equality. And this is what it looks like when it runs live. And you can see that it is testing those 2 variables and indicating they are the same. Now, if data type matters, then you're going to use 3 equal signs. And so in this example, it's basically the same as before, where we've got 2 different years. One is storing a string, one is storing a number. And in this case, because we're using 3 equal signs, it's going to come back and it's going to test false. Okay, it's going to say they are not the same because the data types are not the same. One is a number, one is a string. And here is what it looks like live, and you can see that instead of displaying the message for true, it is displaying the message for false. Now, when we're checking for things that are not equal, we can either use 1 equal or 2 equal signs, and it kind of works the same as those equality operators where we have 2 equal or 3 equal signs. The first one, where we just do not equal, it's just looking at the 2 variables and it's ignoring the data type. The second example, where we have not equal equal, it's looking at the variables and it's looking at the data types. So for the first one, not equal, you'll notice that we have the number 100. In one case, it's a number. In the second case, it is a string. And then we're seeing if they're not equal to each other. Okay, so is 100 not equal to 100? Right, well, that is going to test false, because when we only use 1 equal sign here, it does not matter what the data type is. Okay, it's just going to say, hey, is 100 not equal to 100? Well, they are equal. Okay, so that's going to be false. So it's going to display the numbers are the same. And here is the live run of that example. Now, if data type matters, okay, it's then going to look at both the number and the data type. So in this little example, not equal, equal, okay, it's looking at the hundreds and they're both equal, but the data types are not equal. So it says number 1 does not equal number 2. Well, that is true. Okay, they're not the same. One's a string, one is a number. So I would expect to see the numbers are not the same, and that is exactly what the live example is showing. For this next one, this is just a straight greater than, where you've got two numbers. It's checking to see if one is greater than the other. And here's the example live. And that same example could be run with less than, where you just switch the operator. And you could also run it greater than or equal to, less than or equal to. Okay? And so they would all kind of look similar to this example. Now, quite often you will have a condition you're checking that wants to look at more than one thing. And that is where you get into logical operators. And there's really three different logical operators that you could use. There is a logical and, there's a logical or, and there's a logical not. The logical and requires that all of the conditions are true in order for it to test true. So in this little example, the pay type would have to be H, which is hourly, and the hours would have to be greater than 40 if they want overtime. So if you want to play with this, we could do salary and enter 45 for the hours, hit calculate. You're going to receive regular pay. Now, if we change this to an H and calculate, you get overtime. If we change it to a P and calculate, we're back to regular pay. If we do an H and let's change that to 35, we got regular pay. Okay, because the pay type has to be an H and the hours also have to be greater than 40. So if we do 40, it's still going to do regular pay with no overtime. We get up to 41, then we get the overtime. Okay, so with a logical and, both things have to be true. For the logical or, only one of the conditions has to be true. So here, if the pay type is a 1, 2, or a 3, if any of those are true, it's going to test true. So if we do a pay type of 2, it's going to be true. If we pop that up to a 7, it's going to be false. Okay, so if it's not a 1, 2, or 3, it's basically going to be false. So the logical not, this is kind of a weird little operator because it basically does the opposite of what it would normally return. So here's a little equation, number entered, modulus 2. So the modulus, if you will remember, is an operator that returns a remainder in integer division. So if you have the number 9 and you divide it by 2, 2 does not evenly go into 9. So you have a remainder of 1. So what this is checking is whatever number we enter, if we divide that by 2, is the remainder equal to 0? So basically, is it an even number? All even numbers can be divided by 2, okay, with no remainder. Odd numbers cannot. Okay, so basically, we're checking to see if it's an even number. So if we didn't have this little not here, and let's say we entered a 4, we would expect for it to be true. However, with the not, it makes it false. So it's kind of some weird little logic we get into here. And so if you're going to code for this, okay, you actually have to do some strange little calculating in your code. So I'm going to show you what I did with the code. And I have seen things get really convoluted using nots. So I actually try not to use nots because it can be very confusing. But here's my little script code. And so you can see that you guys are going to learn about event listeners in a couple weeks, but I added a little event listener for clicking on the button. And then I convert the value they enter into an integer. And here I'm checking to see if it's basically even. Can we divide that number by 2 and not have a remainder? Okay. Because I have this weird little not, okay, I had to switch the message around. So normally, without the not, if I just said, you know, number entered modulus 2 equals 0, if it's an even number, I would put the even number message here. Okay. But because we have this not here, we had to flip the message. Because if this is true, the not makes it false. And if this is false, the not makes it true. So it's kind of weird little logic. The only time I really use a not is if I'm checking a menu, my menu options, and I might check to make sure that they didn't select a queue to quit or something like that, okay? Because it's kind of strange logic. I do encourage you guys to go out to W3 Schools because that will give you a little bit more practice with these, playing around with the operators. They do show you a condition that we're going to be talking about in a few minutes. It's a selection operation and uses the ternary operator. All this is a shortened version of the if statement. Okay, so here's the condition that you're checking. You've got the ternary character. This is what it does if it's true. This is what it does if it's false. And we're going to be talking more about that in a few minutes.